3:56 a.m. on July 4th, 1976. A black Mercedes-Benz, a luxury model with small presidential flags on the hood, was rolling down the runway at Entebbe Airport, Uganda. Behind it, 2 Land Rovers followed, each carrying soldiers in Ugandan uniforms. Guards at the old terminal spotted the motorcade. They recognized the car. It was President Idi Amin's Mercedes. One snapped to attention. The other saluted. 90 seconds later, both would be neutralized. Because this Mercedes didn't belong to Idi Amin. The soldiers inside weren't Ugandans. They were 29 Israeli commandos who had flown 4,000 kilometers to rescue 102 hostages from a building guarded by militants and an entire army. Operation Entebbe was one of the most audacious rescue missions in history. Audacious because almost nothing went according to plan. To understand how we ended up on that runway, let's rewind exactly 1 week. And let's not start with heroism, but with the moment everything began. To unravel. June 27th, Athens, Air France. Flight 139 from Tel Aviv was making a stopover. And here's what you need to know about security at Athens Airport in '76. It was virtually non-existent. A guy with a cigarette and a metal detector that beeped for everything and no one in particular. 4 people calmly boarded with weapons. 2 were from the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. The other 2 were Germans, Wilfried Bose, 27, and Brigitte Kuhlmann, from the Revolutionary Cells, a radical faction of a well-known German group. The plane was hijacked mid-air. 248 passengers, 12 crew members. Threats, shock, panic. Next, a refueling stop in Benghazi because Gaddafi was always eager to help. And then, south. Final destination, Uganda. But before we get there, pause. Because what happened on the second day of captivity was more significant than the hijacking itself. The hostages were held in the old terminal, a concrete box right next to the runway, 4 armed hijackers plus a dozen Ugandan soldiers. And on the second day, Wilfried Bose took a stack of passports, stood in the center of the hall, and began calling out names, Israelis and Jews, to the left. Everyone else, to the right. Let me state this plainly so you understand what was happening. A German man stood in the center of a room, sorting people based on whether they were Jewish or not. 1976, 31 years after the camps. Among the hostages were elderly people with tattooed numbers on their forearms, from those very places. They had been through this procedure before, in a different uniform, in a different building, in a different country, but the procedure was the same. There's an account that one of the hostages rolled up her sleeve, showed Bose her number, and asked, "Is this enough?" He looked away. No one knows what was going through his mind at that moment, but remember that moment. It will return. In the final minute of the assault, the non-Israeli hostages were released in the following days. Air France flew them out. Around 100 people remained. All were Israelis or Jews. Deadline, July 4th. Demand, 53 prisoners from jails in 5 countries. If not, an ultimatum. Now let's talk about the man without whom this story would be half as insane. Idi Amin Dada, President of Uganda, Field Marshal, self-proclaimed King of Scotland, conqueror of the British Empire. He claimed that title for himself too. A man rumored to have done utterly insane things to former government members. A myth? Perhaps. But here's what's not a myth. When the hijacked plane landed in Entebbe, Amin didn't just allow the militants to stay. He personally came to meet them, in a bathrobe, carrying a weapon. He shook each of their hands. He smiled. And this isn't a caricature. It's a fact. The man who controlled the army, the airport, and the entire country was on the side of the hijackers. He wasn't neutral. He was a participant. And if you think it couldn't get any worse, wait. Because next, we turn to what was happening on the other side, in Tel Aviv. Yitzhak Rabin didn't sleep. The cabinet was in round-the-clock meetings. And here's something no Hollywood film about Entebbe will tell you. For the first time in Israel's history, the option of negotiations with militants was on the table. For the first time, A country that had built its entire security doctrine on the words, "We don't negotiate with those who take people." This country was now considering backing down, because the alternative was 102 lives. The global press was buzzing. Every newspaper, every channel. Crisis in Uganda. France was applying diplomatic pressure. It was their plane, their airline. America expressed concern. And that was it. The UN threw up its hands. Relatives of. The hostages gathered outside the Knesset. Mothers cried into cameras. Fathers stood with photographs. 102 people sat in a concrete box in Africa. And no one on the planet knew how to get them out. 30,000 of Amin's soldiers. 4,000 kilometers. 0 allies on the ground. This wasn't a mission. It was a death sentence. Except for one group of people in Tel Aviv who said, "We have an idea. A crazy idea. But an idea." And here is the moment that divides this story into before and after. Israeli intelligence obtained blueprints of Entebbe Airport, the original ones. Floor plans, wall layouts, doors, windows, corridors. Why did they even have them? Because, man, this is a fact that makes you want to laugh and cry at the same time. The old Entebbe terminal was built by an Israeli construction firm, Solel Boneh, in the 60s, when Israel and Uganda were still friends. The blueprints were in an archive in Tel Aviv. Just sitting there, in a cabinet. And now, in 48 hours, the military built a full-scale replica of that terminal at a training base. 1-to-1. Commandos began assaulting a building they hadn't seen in reality, but knew by heart. Dozens of dry runs, entry points, operational zones, hostage positions, door-to-door distances. Everything was practiced until it was muscle memory. Now listen, because this is where the most elegant part of the entire plan begins. The Mercedes. Black. Executive. An exact replica of Idi Amin's car, with presidential flags. It was transported in the cargo hold of a C-130 Hercules, along with 2 Land Rovers and 29 commandos in Ugandan uniforms. The entire plan, hinged on one thing. The airport guards were accustomed to seeing that Mercedes. Amin visited regularly. Black car, flags, motorcade. Let it pass. If the commandos approached the terminal at night and the guards assumed it was the president, they would have 30 seconds. 30 seconds. Of confusion. In that time, they needed to drive up close, disembark, enter the building, and engage. 30 seconds. That's all that stood between rescue and failure. But for those 30 seconds to even exist, 4 planes first had to fly 4,000 kilometers. And that flight, that's a story in itself. July 3rd, daytime, 4C13. Oh, Hercules took off from Sharm el-Sheikh, south, over the Red Sea, then a turn west. They flew so low over Lake Victoria that Ugandan radar couldn't detect them. Fuel was critically low. If the Kenyans didn't allow refueling on the return journey, the planes wouldn't make it home. Without overflight permission from Ethiopia, without ground support, without a backup plan. Inside the first Hercules were 29 people who knew they were flying into a country where an army sided with the militants, 100 hostages as human shields, and 1 concrete box from which everyone needed to be extracted within an hour. Now imagine you are one of those. 29. 11 p.m. Entebbe. Pitch black. The first Hercules touched down on the runway without a single light. The rear ramp lowered. The Mercedes drove onto the tarmac. Behind it, the Land Rovers. You're sitting inside. Ugandan uniform. Weapon under the seat. Humid tropical air hits your face. The smell of jet fuel and wet concrete. 300 meters to the old terminal. Inside, 102 people awaiting their fate in 8 hours. They don't know you're flying. They don't know you're here. Flags on the hood. Headlights. The motorcade begins to move. Slowly. 200 meters. 150. 100. And you see a checkpoint ahead. 2 sentries. One begins to raise his hand. Heart in your throat. The sentry raised his hand. Stop. The second, his weapon. Aiming. The motorcade slowed. At that moment, the commandos in the lead vehicle had two options. First, stop. Pretend to be Amin's entourage. Try to negotiate. That was the plan. That's how it was rehearsed. If the guards believed them, 30 seconds of confusion and a quiet approach to the terminal. Second option, open fire. Right now. But then the entire airport would hear the sounds, and instead of a silent assault, it would be a frontal attack on a building full of people. 1 second. 2. The sentry didn't lower his weapon. He shouted something, and the team leader in the car made a decision. To act. Silenced weapons. Muffled clicks. The first sentry was neutralized, but the second wasn't. He was wounded, but on his feet, and he managed to return fire. The sound cut through the night and echoed across the airfield. That was it. The element of surprise was lost. The terminal was 300 meters away. The militants inside now knew someone was outside. The hostages, human shields. And at that moment, one more second. Literally one. Lieutenant Colonel Yonatan Netanyahu, 30 years old, commander of the assault team, older brother of that very Benjamin, made a second decision within a minute. No pause, no radio consultation. Stealth, canceled. Silent assault, canceled. Everything rehearsed for a week, canceled. The only thing left was speed. Who would be faster? The commandos to the doors, or the militants to the people? The assault, now. The vehicles sped forward, 300 meters at full speed. This second was the point where the operation either entered the history books or became a line in an obituary. He chose the history books. Terminal doors. Commandos burst inside. Shouts in Hebrew and English. Get down. Everyone lie down. This was important. People needed to hear a language they understood to distinguish rescuers from enemies. Inside, 4 hijackers. Wilfried Buss, the same German who had sorted people by passports a week earlier, reacted first. And now, pay attention, because these might be the strangest 3 seconds of the entire operation. Bosa stood with a weapon in his hands. Next to him, people. In front of him, commandos with weapons ready. And he froze. According to survivor accounts, he didn't react. Some say he began to lower his weapon. Others, he simply froze. 3 seconds. Perhaps the woman with the number on her arm flashed through his mind. Perhaps not. Perhaps he realized he was on the same side as the people his grandparents had survived. Or hadn't. Or maybe he just froze from shock, and there was no reflection at all. We will never know. 3 seconds later, he was neutralized. Brigitte Kuhlmann was neutralized while attempting to resist. The 2 Palestinians, neutralized in the same minute. 4 hijackers, all 4 eliminated. But this wasn't the end. This was the beginning of the hardest part. Jean-Jacques Memoni, 19 years old. He heard shouts of, "Get down!" But he didn't lie down. He stood up. Maybe from shock. Maybe he didn't understand. Hit. Did not survive. Pasco Cohen, 52 years old. Accidental hit. Not targeted. Not intended. A ricochet. An accident. The mathematics of chaos. Did not survive. Ida Barocevich, 56 years old. At the terminal entrance. Her rescuers were already inside. Free. Minutes from the bus, the plane, home. Caught in the crossfire. Did not survive. 3 people. Survived a week of captivity. Waited for rescue. Their own people. Inside the building. Freedom. Right there. And they didn't make it. In the final minute. When it was all almost over. There is no version of this story where that doesn't hurt. And outside, a hell of its own. 45 Ugandan soldiers engaged in combat. And here's the answer to the question that had plagued the general staff for a week. Would they fight? They would. Commandos were fired upon from the control tower, from the new terminal across the field, from positions that weren't on any blueprint, resistance from all sides, and at that moment, Yonatan Netanyahu stood at the terminal entrance, coordinating the evacuation of people who ran where, which plane, what order, hit, upper back, just below the neck. From where is still debated. The tower? Someone from the ground? It doesn't matter. He was the commander, the only Israeli commando not to return that night. 30 years old. The operation would later be renamed in his honor. Operation Yonatan. His younger brother Benjamin would become Prime Minister of Israel, not once, many times. But that's an entirely different story. Simultaneously, other teams were neutralizing everything that could fly. 11 Ugandan MiGs on the tarmac, methodically, one by one, so that none could pursue the transport planes on their return journey. People were loaded onto the Hercules. 53 minutes, from the first moment until the last plane lifted off the runway. 53 minutes, and it was all over. The planes flew northeast. Refueling in Nairobi, Kenya quietly agreed to help, which Idi Amin did not appreciate, and threatened them with war the following week. The morning of July 4th, Ben Gurion Airport, the planes landed. 102 people, alive. On the tarmac, crowds, families, cameras. The world, which for a week hadn't known what to do, was in shock. But there is one name, and it's a name that hasn't made it into any film. Dora Bloch, 73 years old, British-Israeli citizenship. A few days before the assault, she choked on food. A common piece went down the wrong way. She was taken to Mulago Hospital in Kampala, a regular ward, a regular IV drip. She wasn't at the airport when the assault began. When the planes left, Dora Bloch remained, in a hospital bed, in the capital of a country whose president had just been humiliated before the world. Idi Amin was furious, his army disgraced, his airport in ruins, his MiGs burning. And the only person on whom he could unleash his rage was a 73-year-old woman in a hospital ward. Ugandan officers came for her, took her from her ward. She never returned. Her remains were discovered near a sugar plantation in 2017, 41 years later. A rescue operation that extracted 102 people. And one woman who never came home, because she choked on a piece of food on the wrong day. The standard version of the Entebbe lesson goes like this. Decisive action wins. You don't negotiate with militants. Heroes are heroes. Beautiful. Poster worthy. Only that's not what actually happened. The sentries didn't let the Mercedes pass. The commander wasn't the first to return. 3 people were lost during the rescue. The Ugandans fought harder than expected, and an elderly woman was taken afterward, because a dictator wanted revenge on someone, anyone. Entebbe shows something else. Not beautiful, real. Audacious plans don't work because they're flawless, but because the people executing them adapt faster than everything falls apart. Every participant later said the same thing. I was terrified. They weren't fearless. They were terrified. And they kept going. Because stopping would have meant 102 lost lives instead of 3. The entire difference between legend and disaster. 1 second at the checkpoint. One decision by a 30-year-old lieutenant colonel. And a black Mercedes with unfamiliar flags. Yonatan Netanyahu is buried on Mount Herzl, 30 years old. Idi Amin was overthrown in 79, fled to Saudi Arabia, lived in comfort until 2003. Not a single charge, neither for Entebbe nor for the tens of thousands of victims of his regime. Wilfried Böse, 27 years old. Whether he lowered his weapon in that final second, no one will ever know. Dora Bloch's family waited 41 years to bury her.